Welcome at my presentation today. I'm going to talk about data storytelling with Power BI visual reports. So if you're in the wrong session, it's too late now. You cannot change rooms anymore. There's also a way to provide feedback on my session. There's the QR code that you can scan. I also have it at the end of my presentation, so if you want to provide feedback at the end, I'll show it again. Let me tell you a bit about me. I'm Matsi Stikkelorum. I'm from the Netherlands. I'm a mathematician, and I'm currently working as a data analytics consultant at Quanto, a small company in the Netherlands, which focuses mainly on Power BI solutions and related services. Before that, I was the manager of the BI team at KPMG Netherlands, and I'm very fond, apparently, of organizing events like this, because I'm also a board member of the Dutch Power BI user group, and we just finished our event in the Netherlands, a 3-day event last week. I'm still recovering a bit, but I'm here, so it's very nice to be here as well. Apart from that, I'm also organizing a yearly Power BI summer school, which is in the Netherlands. It's a 3-day event on the beach. And this year, our venue is really on the beach, so that's really nice. We have the subtitle Fun, Sun, and Power BI, where we also really go into depth into the Power BI sessions. We also have Q&A things. And I also have some nice cards, so if you're interested, registration is still open. And pick up a card if you have some interest. Sorry for the bit of advertisement, but it's always nice to have a big audience. So I'm really happy to see a big audience here as well. The outline for today, this is an introductory talk, so I'm going to tell you a bit about what data storytelling is and also how to apply it to visual reports. I'm also going to talk a bit about the Power BI add-in for PowerPoint, which is a really strong tool to help you in data storytelling. But before we dive into the data storytelling, I want to talk a bit about data-driven business transformation. Every organization nowadays wants to be data-driven, but they don't really know how to do that, mostly. You can actually distinguish 4 steps in the data-driven business transformation, which make a cycle, which you can repeat then all again. It really starts with data. Every organization really has lots and lots of data nowadays. But with data alone, you cannot really do anything. It doesn't have much use if you have data alone. You need to be able to give it meaning or create insights from it. And that's the second step here, actually. Based on those insights, you need to be able to take an action from it to really do something with it. And that action generates some measure or some feedback in any way, which creates new data, and thereby finishing the cycle, and then you can start it all over again. So, as an example, think about a production line that produces and delivers some items to some place. You have different steps that has a lot of data. You have some data about how long the steps take, how long it takes to produce an item, how long it takes to deliver it to the final destination. You have to be able to create insights from it. So you want to know which step takes the longest to produce an item, or maybe to deliver the item to the final destination. It gives you some insight what the longest step is and which step you can optimize. You can take an action from it. So maybe you can produce the item in a different factory, which is closer to the final destination where it has to be. And that way, that generates new data, of course, because maybe there are additional costs associated with producing the item in a different factory, or the delivery time itself is, of course, diminishing. That creates some measurements again and some data, and then you can start again and see what other steps you can optimize in that part. Then if you go over to the data storytelling, Stephen Few is a data visualization expert, and he once said that numbers have an important story to tell, but they rely on you to give them a clear and convincing voice. And that's exactly what we are dealing with in data storytelling. The numbers alone don't have a lot of meaning, but if you can wrap them in a story, you can really transfer some knowledge and generate some action from it. So the data storytelling is actually an approach to help the audience to do exactly this, to help the audience comprehend and take action on the data insights, and then again creating a measurement or some feedback which you can do something with again. And that actually involves three key elements: data, visuals, and narrative, which I'm going to talk a bit more about. Each of those key elements is very important, and these three visuals show you how they can strengthen each other. If you start on the left, if you combine data with a narrative, you can explain the data to an audience. For example, if you think about a standard P&L, which is usually some table with numbers on it, if you provide it with a command line to state that the profit for the current year is higher than the profit from last year, it immediately gives the audience some insight about the data. And then the audience doesn't have to look into all those numbers and compare them and actually deduct that one number is higher than the other. It can easily read it, and it explains the data. The middle one, if you combine the data with the visuals, you can enlighten your audience as well. If you think about the same P&L, but not in a table form now, but only the profit for the current year and last year's in a bar chart, for example, you immediately see that the profit for this year is higher than the profit for last year, simply because the bar is higher. Also, the height of the bars gives you also a bit of information about how much higher it is, if it's significant or just a really small amount. In general, people are much more used to taking in pictures than numbers and text. So people are much more perceptive for visuals than for the data alone. So it really helps you to enlighten your public. The last one, if you combine the narrative with the visuals, you can really engage your audience or even entertain it. As children, we are actually very used to learning in this way. If you think about the children's storybooks, they are usually narratives with visuals, or even the animated television shows. They are also usually some visuals and some narrative. And that really helps you to engage or entertain your public. So each of those three key elements have an important task in data storytelling. But if you combine all of them together, you can really drive change and help your audience to change something if you want to. Data storytelling is actually more of a tool of persuasion. You want to persuade your audience in some way to drive change. And if you combine the data, the visuals, and the narrative in the good combination, you can really drive this change. As an example, I want to tell you a bit more about me. You may agree, you may disagree, but I would say my hair is pretty short at the moment. I'm not sure, you probably disagree. But that's because, of course, I went to the hairdresser sometimes. I guess you all went to the hairdresser sometimes. But I am a regular hair donor, actually. So I donated my hair for quite some time. I started when I was about 14 years old. And there are quite some conditions if you want to donate your hair. It must be at least 30 centimeters long, which is quite long. It may not be dyed or have highlights. So this is my natural color as well. In some foundations, they do not accept gray hair. So luckily, that's not yet an issue for me. 3 years ago, I donated more than 35 centimeters of hair. And last July, I donated more than 40 centimeters of hair. And both times I donated to Stichting Haarwensen, which is a Dutch foundation. And they use the human hair to make wigs for children who lost their hair due to some illness. So it's a really good cause. That's a narrative that I just told you. And there's actually quite some data in here. So you have the lengths of the hair. You have some timelines. You can get some data from it. But I can see that it doesn't really engage you as a public. You're all looking, well, that's nice, but whatever. So what if I show you some pictures to go with it, right? So include the last key element. This is me, and this is me at the hairdresser 3 years ago and last July. So if you see the pictures, you can really see, well, what amount of hair is cut off in those 2 times. How long 40 centimeters of hair actually is, and what the impact is on my hairstyle in this case. So maybe you still don't agree that I have short hair, or maybe I didn't convince all of you to go to the hairdresser right now and donate your hair as well. Maybe you can't, because it's not 40 centimeters, of course. But, well, maybe you do agree that for my history, it's pretty short now. Even though when I look at this picture from July, it has already grown quite a bit. So maybe I can go back in 2 years again to donate some more. But I hope it shows you a bit on how these 3 key elements combined really make a data story. Now the next step is how to apply these data storytelling concepts in a visual report. So we have the data, we have the visuals, and we have the narrative. And I want to take you a bit through a journey of some Microsoft tooling. So Excel, Power BI, and a bit of PowerPoint. And to do that, I want to take another personal example. So I'm going to tell you a bit more about me. In my spare time, I'm a volunteer in a bird shelter in Utrecht. And as a shelter, we take in wild birds that are injured or orphaned. And we try to nurse them back to health. And when they are deemed healthy again, we release them again in nature. If it's possible, we release them in the same place where they are found, if it's a safe place. If it's not a safe place, we release them in a safe place, of course. And that gives quite some data. So we can play around with it and see if we can get some insights from that. So I'm going to show that here. Most businesses, when they start with data, they start in Excel. So I guess all of you have used Excel sometimes, right? Who doesn't have used Excel in the audience? No one, right? Okay. Excel is also really easy to learn. You can do quite a lot with it. It can contain some data. You can even create some visuals with it, and you can give in some comments or those things. So it contains all the 3 elements of data, visuals, and narrative. But it doesn't really, it doesn't really visualize or engage, or you can make beautiful things in Excel, but it's also really hard to maintain. You can easily email an Excel to someone else, and he can change some of your calculations. It's really hard then to know which one version is the truth or which version contains the truth. Also, when you enter more data, it becomes really large, really slow. It's really hard to secure. So usually the next step for some businesses is to go into Power BI. That's a tooling that can create more visuals. It's easier to maintain and also easier to update if you have new data. So the next step is usually to go into Power BI. And then whenever businesses start with Power BI, they usually go nuts with it. So they create really a lot of dashboards, a lot of insights in the dashboards, really a lot of visuals. And yeah, they go a bit nuts with it. So we usually call this phase death by dashboards. Not sure if you're familiar with the term. I see some laughing, so I guess some people are familiar with it. I think you agree that this is not really a nice dashboard. So I put this one in the category death by dashboards. I also try to make it a bit more easy on the eyes. So this screenshot actually contains the exact same data of the previous slide. But I hope you agree that this one is a bit better to look at, easier on the eyes, nicer, calmer. If we put them next to each other, you can see maybe it's a bit small, but it actually contains the same data and the same insights. But you can already see some differences that you can use when you are creating a visual report, some tips actually. The left one is really a lot of numbers that pop out. The colors are really bright, really, really bright. And the visuals are also not aligned. It's a bit in your face, so to say. While the one on the right, it uses less bright colors. The visuals are aligned as well. And also a lot of the data labels are hidden in the sense that if you hover over it with your mouse, you can still see them, but not all at the same time, because it makes it a bit hard on which thing you want to focus as a user of the dashboard. So some tips when you are working with Power BI reports. Give every object an explanatory name. It helps the user to see in one line what am I looking at. So yeah, just if you put over it a title on your visual, a reason for take-in, then it's in an instant clear to the user what he is looking at. Be gentle with colors. And if possible, use the colors from the color scheme of the client for which you are building it as well. So they recognize the colors as well, and that makes it easier for them to adopt the dashboard as well. Another tip is to use a background for pages to uniformize the look and feel. It also makes sure that when you go to a different page, the logo or some other pictures doesn't shift a little bit because you've just put it 2 or 3 pixels more to the right on this page. It also makes it easier to render the report if it's in a background, because it doesn't have to render all the different shapes and pictures separately, so it makes it a bit faster as well. Another tip is to align the objects and group them if appropriate. It makes it easier to resize visuals if you have them grouped. And it makes it easier on the eyes if things are aligned and of the same size as well. And probably the most important one is less is more. It gives a user focus if he doesn't have to choose between 20 visuals, but maybe just 3 or 4 on one page. It gives some focus on the user for the user to see what he wants to derive from it. That brings me to actually 2 building blocks in Power BI, which are really important for data storytelling as well. Those are the visualization and the interaction. A visualization can give you some insight. For example, well, you can see which profit is higher, for example. And Power BI allows you to interact with that visual as well. So you can click on a slicer or click on a a category within a visual to see what what the effect is of that category. And by interacting within the Power BI report, the visuals change as well, because they take on more filters or slice and dice your data. And that creates also new insights as well. And maybe based on those insights, you want to interact in a different way with the report. And then you can go on and on and on with this. So the visualization and the interaction are really the two building blocks in Power BI to do something with data storytelling, and also to let the user create his own story within Power BI. So, in a few bullet points, storytelling with Power BI reports, the interactivity allows us to reduce the information, thereby giving focus to the user. You can reduce the number of visuals on a page, because you can add slicers for which you can create the new insights or the new visuals. But you can also reduce the amount of information within one visual by using tooltips, for example. You don't have to show all the data labels for all the categories. If you use tooltips, the user can see the exact value if he hovers over it with the mouse. But he doesn't have to see all of the data labels at the same time. The interactivity also allows us to create what we call data storytelling pathways, also known as progressive disclosure. One way to do that is to create one landing page and one or few pages with some main insights, and then drill through pages with the more detailed storylines. In that way, you hide a lot of information on the main pages, and you allow the user to go to it only when he wants to see the detailed information on that part. So in that way, you can split the information over different pages, and thereby creating focus again for the user. I want to tell a bit more about the different interactions and toolings that you have in Power BI reports to help you with this data storytelling. So I picked out a few: the drill through pages, the tooltips, the bookmarks. Those three I incorporated in my bird shelter report as well. So I want to show them to you. Another one that is fairly recent, but is a really nice tooling for your toolbox in Power BI, is the field parameters. I haven't incorporated that in my bird shelter data, but I do want to mention it and give some information about it, because it's a really nice addition to the toolbox. And it's really important to keep in mind less is more, because you want to avoid the death by dashboards phase. So if you start with the drill through pages, like I said, it allows you to split the information, and thereby you can present the information in blocks, only show the user what he is interested in. And if he is interested in other things, he can use the interaction to go to other pages with that detailed information. If you use that, don't forget the back button for navigation. It's usually it comes with Power BI if you create a drill through page, but make sure the back button is somewhere visible, or at least not hidden. It's also a nice common way to hide the drill through pages. That way you can make sure that the user is only getting there by drilling, and not with a combination of filters for which the user is not, for which the page doesn't give a lot of information. It's also possible to make dynamic drill through pages. I actually wrote my very first blog about that earlier this week. So please check it out if you want to know more about a dynamic drill through. It allows you to go to different kind of detail pages based on some block of information that can be a category in your report or maybe some external factor as well. I also mentioned tooltips already a few times. Tooltips also provide you with additional information, but only when a user is focused on that specific part and not and really hovering over it, not showing all the data for all the different data points as well. It can be used to reduce information in a visual, but it can also provide additional information which you are not able to see inside the visual as well. I have a nice example of that in my report. I will come there in a minute. Just want to give some theoretical foundations before that. Third one is the bookmarks. That can also be used to divide the information. You can use them in combination with a button to switch between some view with the to see one set of information and then click on the button to see another set of information. The field parameters make this a lot easier actually, so maybe it's even better to use field parameters. Like I said, the field parameters are really great addition to your toolbox. You can combine different axis dimensions, for example, but you can also combine different measures and let the user decide based on a slicer whether he wants to see the visual based on a country or I don't know, a city, or you can also let the user choose between the measures that are shown, so whether he wants to see the sales or the profit or the costs. It's really making a dynamic change, and it really helps to split the information which is shown. So let's have a look at all those things in Power BI. Let me see. So this is my report about the bird shelter data. As you can see, it actually has one visible page, and this is my home page. And for the rest, none of the other pages are visible. So I have one landing page, and you can go to some pages with some main insights here. But otherwise, none of the other pages are visible. So you can really create your own story as a user. For example, let's look at the yearly statistics. We have 3 years of data in here. You can choose here which kind of year you want to see. So for example, you can also have a look at the current year, but the current year is not that long yet. So to get some insights and to guide you through some insights, I will have a look at the 2022 data. On the top right, you can see how many birds have left the shelter each month. You can see that there's quite a peak in the spring and summer months. That's because we get more juvenile birds at that time, and they are released again in the summer. There are essentially 4 ways to leave the shelter. So we have 2 nice ones. Those are in green, the released ones and the relocated ones. We can relocate birds to mainly another shelter. Sometimes some shelters are specialized in a specific type of bird, like birds of prey. And they are much better off in those kind of shelters. So we usually relocate them to different shelters. The other 2 ways are not so nice to leave the shelter, because sometimes they die of their own, of course, and sometimes they are euthanized by our vet. Of course, it happens a lot because it's a shelter, it's like a bird hospital. So the ones who come there are usually already injured or sick or orphaned. So that's a bit of a side note. Same as more people die in the hospital than in a school, for example. You can also see the division between the adults and the juvenile birds. That's also important because we have to do different things with adults and juveniles. The adult ones, they usually just get food and water inside a cage. And the and the juvenile ones sometimes have to be hand-fed, so that takes more time as well. I'm not sure about you, but I'm not really familiar with the English names of the bird species. And since I was doing this presentation in English, I had to translate them. So what I did is a tooltip that I'm pretty proud of, actually, that gives you some additional information about what kind of bird it is. So you can see a little picture of the bird. So a mallard is apparently the correct English word for what I would call a duck, but maybe that's just me. And you can also see that a common wood pigeon, probably you've seen that before, or the doves. So these are tooltips, customized tooltips, which give you really additional information about the birds in this case. You also saw the standard tooltips maybe here. Those are not really nice to look at. Another one is the drill through. You can also click on a bird species and then drill through to the details and see more data about the mallard in this case. So yeah, you see, we mostly get them in as juveniles, little ducklings. 95% of them is actually a juvenile. And you can also see that they are mostly in the shelter in the spring and summer months. If you take a look at really the juvenile ones, you really see a high peak for the ones that are staying in the shelter in the spring and the summer months. You see that most of them are released, so that's really nice news. They have a pretty big survival chance, but they also are quite a long time within the shelter. That's also because we get them in as ducklings, and we usually get a whole nest of them as well, because the parents are gone or whatever. They usually come in because they are alone and they cannot really fend for themselves, so they stay quite a while at the shelter before they are big enough to fend for themselves and really can survive in nature. Let's see, if you want to see a bit more about the distinction between the juveniles and the adults, you can also click here on the juvenile part. You see that, again, the mallard is still on top of the most birds that we have in the shelter in 2022. You really see this peak in the spring and the summer months, which is also expected, I guess. But if we concentrate instead on the adults, you see a more evenly spread pattern. And also you can see that the number of birds per species has changed, because now suddenly 3 types of doves are actually on top. That's already an insight that you can get from the dashboard just by a small interaction, by clicking on one visual and then filtering the rest of the visuals. So that's already an insight. So you've seen the drill through pages, the tooltips, not yet the bookmarks. Let's have a look at the bookmark. I have created a bookmark in combination with a button under the Details About page. So suppose you are working in the bird shelter, like me, and a bird comes in and you want to know a bit more about that specific bird. So you can choose, based on a filter, about which bird you want to know more. So, suppose we take the carrion crow, and we want to see some details about the carrion crow. You see that we only get these in as juveniles, actually. They have a pretty good survival chance, 87%, but they are also quite a while inside the shelter. You also see that they only come in a bit late in spring and summer, staying in the shelter. That's actually, well, logical, because most of the birds, we actually have a saying in Dutch which says that all birds lay their eggs in May. I'm not sure if you also have something in your own language, but you can really see that here as well. In May they start to come in as juveniles, and then we patch them up again, make them a bit bigger, and then we release them again in the nature. Let's see if I can also guide you through another insight by having a look at one of my favorite doves, which is the Eurasian colored dove. Not sure if you're familiar with it, but maybe if you see the picture. Is that one ringing a bell? Good, good. Because I know a fact about doves, and you can see that from the data as well. So let's see if we can learn something about doves as well. If we have a look at the juvenile ones that we get in, maybe you see something about the pattern of the birds that are staying in the shelter. It doesn't seem to be true that all dove birds lay their eggs in May. And that's actually a fact. Doves breed the entire year. They don't only lay their eggs in May, but also in the winter months. Most doves are smart enough not to do that, because the survival chances are really a lot less in the cold winter months. But they produce some kind of milk with which they can feed their younglings also during the winter. So you can actually see from the data that the pattern of only having juveniles in the spring and summer months is not true for this kind of bird. So again, a little insight. Maybe one more. If we have a look at the Eurasian woodcock, not sure if that one rings a bell because it's not most commonly known. You can see that we only get these in as adult birds. We had 13 in 2022. And the reason for take-in was mostly windows, that they flew against the window and they were a bit, out of their action. So they came to us to recuperate for a bit. They are usually not long in our shelter, only 2.4 days on average. And if you have a look at the period in which they come in, you can see that it's really concentrated around 2 sets of months during the year, which is February, March, and October, November, December. And that's actually because this is a migratory bird. It doesn't breed in the Netherlands. So that's why we never see the juvenile ones. They only come across the Netherlands when they go to the south in the winter months. And sometimes they fly against the window and then they end up at our bird shelter. And in February, they fly back again. And then some others fly against the window. And then they come to recuperate a bit in our bird shelter again. So, some insights, some things I wanted to show you in the Power BI report. Let's go back to the presentation. See if it works again. A really short view of Copenhagen, actually, in my background. Because I also want to tell you a bit about the Power BI add-in for PowerPoint, which is a tooling that specifically supports the data storytelling. It enables you to embed a whole Power BI report inside PowerPoint while keeping all the interaction. That was released in May, I think, last year. But not too long ago, they also embedded or gave the opportunity to embed only individual visuals inside your PowerPoint presentation. And it allows you to keep the interaction, because it's a bit annoying that I give a presentation, I have slides in PowerPoint, I want to show you things in Power BI, in the service, I have to close down my presentation, go to a service, and then I need to set up the presentation again. So this feature allows you to actually do it all inside PowerPoint. So this is the same model, but now embedded in the PowerPoint report. Let's see. Yes. And the nice thing is that it keeps the interaction here as well, because I could also have made some snapshots of the Power BI report, pasted them in PowerPoint, but that would just not do, because what if I showed you or pasted a picture about the Eurasian collared dove, but you wanted to see the wood pigeon instead? I don't have that picture, so I cannot tell you anything about it. But in this case, it keeps the interaction, so I can really do the same things inside this report. So I want to show you a bit about a different button on my landing page, which is the staffing. Now, hope it works. This page shows you a bit about what is happening at this time in the bird shelter. You can see on the left that there are currently 26 birds present, and last year there were only 20 in the same day. And it also gives you a bit of insight on what is to come. So you can see the number of incoming birds from the last year. You can see that we are really approaching a peak. So the times at the shelter will become longer. We will need more volunteers to help with all the birds. The winter months are usually a bit more slowly in the bird shelter. You can also see which kind of birds are actually present here, and it is distinguished between the adults and the juveniles. That's also important to know because, like I mentioned already, the juvenile birds are more work because sometimes they really have to be hand-fed, and then maybe you can use more volunteers. So the board of the bird shelter can also use this to make some decisions about whether to get more volunteers for cleaning and feeding all the birds. And this also keeps all the interactions. So I can still click on the Western jackdaw, for example, and then go to the detail page. And you can see, again, some details about the Western jackdaw in this case. Yeah, jackdaw. So you can really keep the interaction. So that's really valuable if you want to give a presentation and immediately get some insights from some specific data. So this is embedding a whole report. But it's also possible to just embed a specific visual. And in this case, it's even more easy on the eyes because it gives you really focus on what you would like to tell in your presentation. And again, all the interaction here is still kept. So you can see that even here, if it works, all the tooltips are still here. So you can still see all the tooltips, and if you embed more visuals, you can also interact with them still. So that's a really nice feature, and it's really designed to help you with the data storytelling inside PowerPoint. Okay. So, we're already at the end of my presentation. A bit of a recap. I've told you a bit about data storytelling. I hope you remember all the 3 key elements of the data, the visuals, and the narrative. We talked a bit about how to apply these storytelling concepts within Power BI visual reports. The 2 building blocks, visualization and interaction, are really important. There are also a lot of tools in Power BI available to help you with these things. So you have the drill through pages, you have the tooltips, bookmarks, also the field parameters. I haven't shown you, but it's a really nice tool inside Power BI for data storytelling as well. I also showed you the Power BI add-in for PowerPoint, and I hope you learned a bit more about birds. So this is actually a juvenile dove, which is a really ugly youngling, but it is kind of cute. I hope you agree. That's actually the end of my presentation, so please provide your feedback. I don't think I have missed any questions about there, but if there are any questions...
We do actually have a couple of questions online.
Okay.
Unfortunately, they're not coming through on the screen, so apologies for that.
No problem.
2 of them are almost exactly the same, which is what actions has the bird sanctuary actually taken based on the report? So you've gone through the narrative, the visualization, you've engaged them. What actionable output has there been based on that?
Yeah, I have to admit, I've created the report, but the board of the bird shelter hasn't adopted it yet. So currently no actions are being taken from this, but I hope that they will adopt it, especially for the staffing part. You can really take actions from it by getting some insight on how busy it is in the shelter and whether they need more volunteers, so they can do a survey to get more volunteers if needed, or call off volunteers when it's not needed. So that's an action that you can take based on that staffing page, for example. Yeah.
Thank you. Another quick one from online. Does the PowerPoint add-in work with direct query?
With direct query?
Yeah.
Actually, I'm not sure. I think Microsoft probably has a beautiful documentation page on it, but I haven't tried that, no, I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you. And the final one from online. Great story around the hair. Any tips on how somebody can get their hair to grow like yours?
To grow it like mine? Yeah, I get a lot of questions on whether I use poke-on, which you use for plants to grow on my hair, but unfortunately I have no real tips about growing your hair. I usually don't do a lot with it, so I guess I'm blessed in that way, but to give something back, I donate it back to the foundation. So, sorry. And